Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Sherrone Moore, this Michigan program, making a lot of noise over the last couple of weeks on the recruiting trail. And you kind of look at the next couple of weeks and what it might look like for Michigan. It has the potential to be a very exciting next couple of weeks. And many of y'all know I'm a Michigan fan. There ain't much to talk about other than the recruiting trail. And we talked about what it is in 2024. But on the recruiting trail, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about where this Michigan program is going. Want to look at, kind of the top names that are still on Michigan's board in the 2025 class, talk about some potential flip commitments, talk about some potential late commitments for this Michigan program. Now, it's obviously headlined by Bryce Underwood. That's who's getting all the national media attention, and rightfully so. I've been very vocal. I think this kid is, generationally talented at the quarterback spot. But outside of Bryce Underwood, there are a lot of top targets that Michigan is still going after to close out 2025. Fired up to get into this one. Now, before we do, and as always, the Michigan fans, I'm sure many of y'all are locked in onto the recruiting trail. Would love to hear some names that you would like to see wind up in this Michigan class in 2025. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. From a Michigan fan's perspective, it's going to be a very fun next couple of weeks, not only on the recruiting trail, but in the transfer portal as well. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Let's get into Bryce Underwood real quick. And there's not, a ton to add. We've been kind of saying it's going to be a waiting game. When it happens, it's going to happen if it happens. There are a few things to monitor on LSU side of things. Now, you look at Michigan side of things, I think they've done all they could, right? They've pitched it to Bryce Underwood. They pitched the NIL. I think the hay's in the barn from a Michigan perspective. From an LSU perspective, there are a couple storylines to follow that could help Michigan out on this recruitment. I think it starts with offensive coordinator Joe Sloan. I think that is by far the biggest pull that Bryce Underwood has to LSU. He's been very vocal that Joe Sloan and him have a very good relationship. He trusts what Joe Sloan has done in terms of developing quarterbacks, and for good reason. Like, Joe Sloan is doing a really good job in terms of developing quarterbacks. Well, because of that, he's a name that's getting a lot of buzz in terms of potential head coaching job. Most notably East Carolina. But what happens if Joe Sloan ends up taking another job after the 2024 season? I think the biggest portion or part of why Bryce Underwood's committed to LSU was Joe Sloan. And so that certainly could open up the door for Michigan to get in this recruitment. I think finally, you look at Garrett Nussmeier. I think one of the things that Michigan can certainly sell Bryce Underwood that maybe LSU can is, hey, you come to Michigan, you're starting in 2025. You're the guy, and we're building an offense around you. For LSU, I think 4 weeks ago, we kind of assumed Garrett Nussmeier was going to be a top 20 pick in the NFL draft. We thought he'd move on, and Bryce Underwood would probably be the year one starter for LSU in 2025. Well, you kind of fast forward to the middle of November here. Garrett Nussmeier struggled in a big way. He certainly hasn't helped his draft stock, and I'm sure he's hurt his draft stock. What happens if Garrett Nussmeier says, well, my draft stock's not as high as I thought it was going to be. I'm going to come back to LSU for one more year, and Bryce Underwood is kind of forced to be the backup in 2025. Whereas Michigan, hey, you can come start right away for Michigan. I don't know how much it matters to Bryce Underwood to be a year one starter. I would think it matters a little bit. You seeing these young quarterbacks, they want to find the field early. Bryce Underwood, Michigan can sell that to Bryce Underwood. I don't know if LSU will be able to at the end of 2024. So the future of Garrett Nussmeier in the quarterback room, the future of Joe Sloan at offensive coordinator, those are the two things that as a Michigan fan, you got to certainly monitor in terms of this recruitment. Now, that's kind of what it is with Bryce Underwood. I think another massive storyline is that if Bryce Underwood ends up flipping his commitment from LSU to Michigan, I think it puts you firmly in the driver's seat for four-star wide receiver Derrick Meadows. You look at Derrick Meadows and say it doesn't sound like he's going to be signing his paperwork to LSU. It seems like it's between Notre Dame and Michigan. And without Bryce Underwood in the class, you probably think Notre Dame has the upper hand. At this point with Michigan's offense, it's really hard to sell these wide receivers in terms of what Michigan's going to do on offense. But if you land Bryce Underwood, like, all bets are off. I think Derrick Meadows, a large portion of why Derrick Meadows committed to LSU in the summer was he knew he was going to have a really good quarterback throwing him the football over the next couple of years. If Bryce Underwood ends up flipping his commitment, I would not be surprised if Michigan can firmly get in it for Derrick Meadows. And y'all know how I feel about Derrick Meadows. This kid, a little bit raw. He's not been the most productive wide receiver at the high school ranks out there in Bishop Gorman. That being said, like the skill set for Derrick Meadows, you don't find these guys growing on trees. He is one of one, unique physical traits, 6'5", 200 pounds, elite track and field background. This is exactly what Michigan is looking for in that wide receiver room, a wide receiver that can really, take the top off of a defense, be someone that a defense has to respect working vertically down the field. You look at the biggest flaw within this Michigan offense outside of the quarterback spot is who's kind of striking fear into an opposing defense from a pass catcher standpoint outside of Colston Loveland. I don't think there's a name. Derrick Meadows would be one of those names. And you look at Derrick Meadows and Andrew Marsh, that would be a very good young set of wide receivers to surround Bryce Underwood with over the next couple of years. And I think, again, if Bryce Underwood ends up flipping his commitment to Michigan, I think that puts Michigan in a really good spot to land wide receiver Derrick Meadows. Now, I think the biggest news we got to talk about that is, kind of coming out this morning is Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, Michigan personal favorite of mine. Crystal ball by Tom Lloyd to come to Michigan, or commit to Michigan, I should say. This would be huge. This kid is awesome. You look at Michigan, and one of the biggest improvements they've made on the defensive side of the football is getting a little bit more athletic. And you go back to the Don Brown era of this Michigan defense. We had some good linebackers, guys like Ross, but outside of, Devin Bush, Michigan never really had premier athletes at the linebacker spot. And when we bumped into teams like Ohio State, we just didn't have the speed in the back end to deal with the middle of the field and deal with, running backs and tight ends in space. That's been an adjustment and a change that Michigan has made. They're leaning into the better athletes at the linebacker position. Think of Jay-Sean Barham this year. Think of Junior Colston last year. Guys that excel going sideline to sideline, playing in space. That's Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. Kind of reminds me of Kobe Dean. He's kind of a shorter, stouter linebacker. This kid is absolutely rocked up. He looks a heck of a lot heavier than 205 pounds. But at the end of the day, he flies to the football. In this modern era of college football, especially when the Big Ten with teams like USC and Oregon and Washington coming in, we need speed and space to deal with some of those offenses, especially if you want to be competitive in the college football playoffs. This is one of those linebackers that lets you do it. You talk about tackling running backs in the flat. You talk about carrying tight ends up the seam. Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng can do all of that. Now, on a very similar note, I'm a massive fan of Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. I'm also a massive fan of Bradley Gompers. Bradley Gompers currently committed to Duke. His recruitment has taken off. This kid, I just buzzed his senior film a couple of days ago. This kid rocks. He looks and kind of reminds you of Cole Sullivan. He goes to the same high school as Cole Sullivan. If Michigan can land Bradley Gompers, you talk about getting that more athletic at the linebacker spot, like Nate Owusu-Boateng, Bradley Gompers. You got Cole Sullivan in the 2024 class. That would be an extremely good young linebacker room for this Michigan program. I love that we're trending for Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. I would love to be trending for Bradley Gompers as well. Now, a couple other names that I'm just going to throw out real quick. One, Elijah Dotson. It sounds like Ivan Taylor's probably flipping to Alabama, which is what it is. Like, we like Ivan Taylor. I think a nice pivot play is four-star safety Elijah Dotson, who I think could play on the offensive side of the football as well as kind of the primary pass catcher for Bryce Underwood in Belleville. Elijah Dotson's awesome. Like 6'2", 180. He's long. He's really fast, has good ball skills. Yeah, Ivan Taylor's a really good football player, and I think a really good IQ. Like, when you turn on the film for Ivan Taylor, there's a lot to like. There's a reason he's a top 100 national prospect. Elijah Dotson is probably arguably more physically gifted. I would love to see Elijah Dotson in the back end of this Michigan defense, especially with the versatility he has. I mean, he can play safety, play the box safety, play nickelback. We all know Wink Martindale, and you've seen it so far this year. We're getting really I would say creative in terms of how we're using our defensive backs. And I think partially that's because we're really banged up at that position. But, Wink Martindale wants to be multiple. He wants to give you a lot of different looks. Elijah Dotson certainly could do that. The last name I'll shout out, and I don't think we've ever talked about him in relation to Michigan yet, Toby Hastrup. This kid, David Ajabo vibes. He's new to football. This is his first year playing football. His senior year of high school. This is his first year playing football, getting a ton of buzz on the recruiting trail. 6'4", 230, runs a sub 7 or sub 1100, a sub 11 second 100-meter dash. This kid is so twitched up for his size. He's fast, he's long, and what I'll say is he's got some power in those hands too. Now, he doesn't really know what he's doing on the football field yet. That's pretty clear. That's okay. Like, let Lou Esposito get his hands on this kid, maybe give him a redshirt year. I think this kid is similar to kind of David Ojabo, where Don Brown and that Michigan staff always said, hey, keep your eyes on David Ojabo. When it clicks, it's going to click in a big way. And when it clicked for David Ojabo, there wasn't many better edge rushers in the country. I think it could be a very similar developmental arc for a guy like Toby Hastrup as well. Those are the names that I'd be looking at. And again, Michigan, Grayson Littleton, who is, kind of trending to Texas, but I think it's between Michigan and Texas. There's a lot of names to monitor. These are probably my favorite 6 names to look at. And again, at the end of the day, you get Bryce Underwood. I think a lot of Michigan fans will be just fine with how this 2025 class plays out. But there are a lot of other names outside of Bryce Underwood to keep an eye on for this Michigan program. We'll close it down there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.